Kensington, Philadelphia, 1991. The calm before the story unfolds.
In the early morning hours of September 23, 1991, the silence of Philadelphia's Kensington neighborhood was shattered not by one, but by three bursts of gunfire. Before the sun could rise, three men would be found dead within a 6-block radius, all killed between 2:47 a.m. and 4:15 a.m. All shot multiple times with the same weapon, a .38 caliber revolver. All left with their wallets untouched, their drugs still in their pockets, but with a single playing card placed on their chests. The Queen of Hearts. Philadelphia Police Detective Raymond Walsh arrived at the first scene at 3:22 a.m. By the time he reached the third body at 4:47 a.m., he knew this wasn't a random act of violence. It was a message, but in the narrow alleys of Kensington, among the row houses where laundry still hung on lines stretched between buildings, everyone already knew the truth before the police did. Someone had declared war. And the reason for that war wasn't money, or territory, or drugs. It wasn't revenge for a gangland murder. It was a 22-year-old nursing student named Sophia Luna, and what three men had tried to do to her in a dark alley just 72 hours earlier. This is the story of her two older brothers, Carlos and Miguel Luna. Factory workers who had never been arrested a day in their lives. Men who went to church with their mother every Sunday. Men who were about to cross a line that would define the rest of their lives and test everything they believed about justice, family, and the price of protecting the people you love. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. The story you are about to hear doesn't glorify revenge. It shows you what happens when the justice system fails and desperation takes its place. This narrative also contains content about sexual assault that may be disturbing to some viewers. Before we begin, tell us what country and city you're listening from. We want to know how far these stories of forgotten American neighborhoods reach. Let me take you back to Kensington in September of 1991. If you weren't from Philadelphia, you might have driven through on your way to somewhere else and seen only what the city wanted you to see. Row houses built in the 1920s, narrow streets, corner stores with faded awnings, churches with bells that still rang on Sundays. But if you lived there, like the Luna family did, you knew Kensington was a neighborhood holding on by its fingernails. The factories that had once employed half the neighborhood were gone. The ones that remained, like the Frankfurt Steel Works where Carlos Luna worked, were hanging on with skeleton crews, paying wages that hadn't gone up in a decade. The crack epidemic had sunk its teeth deep into Kensington by 1991. You could see it in the boarded-up houses, one or two on every block. You could feel it in the way people walked faster after dark, how mothers pulled their children inside when the sun started to set, how the sound of gunshots had become so common that sometimes people didn't even bother to call the police anymore. The air in September smelled like a mix of things: bread from the Portuguese bakery, coffee from the corner store, car exhaust, and the faint chemical tang from the factories. The streets were narrow, barely wide enough for two cars to pass. The old sodium vapor streetlights cast an orange glow, flickering and humming. Some had been shot out and never replaced. The sound of Kensington at night was a symphony of dogs barking, televisions playing, distant sirens, the rumble of the L train, and, more and more often, the crack of gunfire. This was the Kensington where Carlos Alberto Luna lived with his family. Carlos was 29 years old. He stood 6'1", weighed 195 pounds, built solid from 12 years working the floor at Frankfurt Steel Works. His hands were broad and scarred, covered with small burn marks from years of working with steel. His face was angular with a strong jaw. He had a scar on his left eyebrow and dark brown eyes. He walked with a slight limp from an accident at the factory 2 years earlier, when a piece of steel fell on his left foot and broke 3 bones. Carlos woke every morning at 5 a.m. without an alarm. By 5:15, he was downstairs making coffee. By 5:45, he was out the door, walking the 7 blocks to the factory with his lunch pail in his hand. He worked the day shift, 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., 6 days a week. He operated the shear press, cutting steel sheets to specification. He made $10.50 an hour in 1991, about $460 a week before taxes. He gave $200 of that to his mother for rent and food. The rest he saved in a coffee can in his bedroom, money for the future. Carlos got home at 3:30 p.m., showered, and ate dinner with his family at 5 p.m. sharp. After dinner, he might smoke a cigarette on the front steps, watching the neighborhood. He was in bed by 10:20 p.m. Carlos Luna believed in hard work. He believed in family above everything. He believed in God, though he had questions about what God allowed to happen in neighborhoods like Kensington. He had never been arrested. He was known as a good man, a quiet man, the kind who helped neighbors carry groceries. But Carlos Luna also believed that there were lines that couldn't be crossed. He believed that when the system failed, you had to protect your family by whatever means necessary. And he believed his younger sister Sofia was worth protecting at any cost. Miguel Antonio Luna, Carlos's younger brother, was 26. He stood 5'11", weighed 180 pounds, leaner than Carlos, but just as strong. He worked at the same factory, operating the welding station, working in showers of sparks. Miguel had the same dark hair, but his face was rounder, younger looking. He had a thick mustache he was proud of, and a tattoo of a Puerto Rican flag on his shoulder. He had a girlfriend, Teresa, and they talked about getting married. Miguel was lighter in personality, quicker to laugh, but also quicker to anger, more impulsive. He loved his family with the same intensity as Carlos. He loved his mother, Rosa, who had raised them alone after their father died, and he loved his baby sister, Sofia. Sofia Maria Luna was 22. She stood 5'5", had long dark hair and her mother's intelligent brown eyes. She was in her 3rd year at Temple University's School of Nursing, one of the few from her neighborhood to make it to college. She worked part-time at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children, working the evening shift, 4 p.m. to midnight. She took the bus home and walked the 2 blocks from the stop to the house. Sofia was brilliant. She had graduated high school with a 3.9 GPA and was on a partial scholarship. She wanted to be a pediatric nurse. She was kind, patient, the kind of person who tutored neighborhood kids. She was also stubborn and determined. She had dreams of traveling, of owning a house, of getting her mother out of Kensington. Rosa Elena Luna, the mother, was 54. She had raised 3 children alone for 8 years. She worked as a seamstress, taking the bus every morning at 6:30 a.m. and getting home at 5 p.m. She kept the house clean and went to church every Sunday at St. Anne's. She was tired, but she never complained. She believed in God, in family, and that if you worked hard enough, things would work out. The Luna family lived at 2847 East Allegheny Avenue, a narrow row house with a red door. The walls were thin, the floors creaked, the roof leaked. But it was home. It was clean. It smelled like pine sol and home-cooked food. But the streets around them were not safe. There were drug corners on almost every block, run by crews of young men. The police came through, made arrests, but the dealers always came back. Residents learned to navigate it. They learned which blocks to avoid. But there were rules, even in Kensington. You didn't mess with women just trying to get home from work. But not everyone followed those rules. 3 blocks from the Luna house was an alley that ran between Jasper and Cambria streets. It was a shortcut that cut 2 blocks off the walk from the L station. It was barely wide enough for a car, lined with dumpsters in the backs of garages. The one streetlight had been broken for 6 months. On the night of September 20th, 1991, a Friday, Sophia finished her shift at midnight. She got off the bus at 12:35 a.m. She was tired. She had an exam to study for. She paused at the mouth of the dark alley, considered going the long way, but she wanted to get home. She entered the alley. Halfway through, she heard footsteps behind her. Fast footsteps, multiple people. She started to turn, and that's when her life changed forever. The 3 men who entered that alley behind Sophia Luna were not strangers. Everyone in Kensington knew who they were, and that's what made what happened next even more terrible. Because when Sophia would report it, the police would know exactly who she was talking about, and they would do nothing. The first was Robert James Morrison. Everyone called him Bobby Mack. He was 27, 6 feet tall, 210 pounds, with red hair, a thick red beard, and cold blue eyes. He had a scar on his cheek from a knife fight. He was a mid-level dealer with a mean streak who liked to hurt people. The second was David Lee Thompson, called Dit, or sometimes Crazy D. He was 24, wiry, with a mullet and paranoid darting eyes. He was a street-level runner who would do anything Bobby Mack told him to do. The third was Vincent Paul Russo, Vinny. He was 26, stocky, with slick-back black hair and a crooked nose. He was the one who handled the money. Smarter than Bobby, but just as complicit. These 3 men ran together. They dealt on a corner at Frankfurt and Cambria. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the rules didn't apply to them. On that night, they were drunk and high and restless. They were walking through the alley toward Vinny's car when they saw her. Sophia Luna, walking alone in the dark. Bobby saw her first. He wanted to mess with her. They started walking faster. Sophia heard them and started to run. She didn't make it 10 steps. Bobby grabbed her backpack and yanked her to the ground. Deet covered her mouth. They dragged her behind a dumpster. Sophia fought. She bit Deet's hand. She kicked Vinny. She scratched Bobby's face. She screamed, but no one came. Because in Kensington in 1991, you heard screams and you stayed inside. Bobby punched her in the face. He punched her in the stomach. They tore at her clothes. Sophia knew what was about to happen. She knew she might die in that alley. And then, a miracle. A car turned onto Jasper Street, its headlights sweeping across the alley's entrance. Bobby froze. He panicked. They let her go and ran, disappearing into the darkness. Sophia lay on the ground, bleeding, her clothes torn. But she was alive. She picked up her backpack and walked home. She walked through her front door at 12:53 a.m. and called out for her mother. When Carlos and Miguel came downstairs and saw their sister, they didn't need to ask. They knew. At 1:15 a.m., Carlos called the police. 2 officers arrived at 1:47. They took Sophia's statement, photographed her injuries, and wrote everything down. They asked if she could identify the men. She said yes. She described Bobby Mack, Dit, and Vinny Russo. The officers looked at each other. They knew exactly who she was talking about. They told the family a report would be filed and detectives would follow up. They gave them a case number and left. 3 days passed. Carlos called the station every day. On the third day, he got the truth. There wasn't enough evidence, no witnesses, no sexual assault kit. It was Sophia's word against 3 men who would deny everything. The Dawes office had declined to prosecute. Carlos went to the station and spoke to Detective Raymond Walsh. Walsh believed him. He believed Sophia. But he explained that belief wasn't enough. The case was closed. Carlos Luna walked out of the police station at 2:47 p.m. on September 23rd. He walked past the corner where Bobby Ditt and Vinny were standing, dealing drugs, laughing. Bobby saw him and smirked. They laughed. Carlos kept walking. He made it home, went to his room and sat on his bed. He made a decision. The law had failed. The system had failed. So he would do what the system wouldn't. He would give his sister justice. He would make sure those 3 men never hurt anyone again. At 3:45 p.m., Miguel came home. Carlos told him what he was planning. Miguel didn't hesitate. He just nodded and said one word, when. They talked for hours. 3 men needed to die, all 3. And it had to send a message. They needed a gun. Carlos remembered a man from the factory, Tommy Brennan, who knew where to find one. Through a coded conversation, they got a name, Dante Martinez. That night, Carlos went to Dante's apartment. He paid $250, 2 weeks' pay, for a .38 Special Smith & Wesson revolver and a box of ammunition. He brought it home, wrapped in a grocery bag. In the basement, away from their mother and sister, they learned how to load it. They practiced for 2 hours. They decided on the message, a playing card on each body. The Queen of Hearts, for Sophia, the heart of their family, at 2 a.m. On September 23rd, Carlos and Miguel left their house through the back door. Carlos had the gun. Miguel had 3 playing cards. They walked through the alleys to the corner of Frankfurt and Cambria. It was empty. The crew had packed up. Panic set in. Then Miguel remembered. Vinny's car. He always parked it on Jasper Street. They found the Honda Accord and waited in an abandoned house across the street. At 3:02 a.m. they saw them, Vinny and Det, walking toward the car. No Bobby. Carlos's heart pounded. This was the moment. He and Miguel crossed the street. "Hey," Carlos said. Vinny and Det turned. Recognition. Then Carlos raised the gun and fired. The first shot hit Vinny in the chest. He slid down the side of his car. Carlos stood over him and fired a second shot. Dead. He placed a Queen of Hearts on his chest. Det ran. Miguel chased him, caught him at the corner. Carlos caught up and fired twice. Det stopped moving. Dead. Another Queen of Hearts. 2 down. 1 to go. They needed Bobby Mack. At 3:19 a.m. they saw him. Bobby Mack, walking alone on Frankfurt Avenue, talking on a brick cell phone. They followed him. He turned onto Cambria Street, lit a cigarette. Carlos called his name. Bobby turned. He saw the gun and his hand went to his waistband, but Carlos was faster. The first shot hit Bobby in the shoulder. He hit the wall. Miguel tackled him. As Bobby lay on the ground, he looked up at Carlos. He saw his face. He understood. He started to apologize. Carlos fired twice into his chest. Dead. 3:28 a.m. Carlos placed the third Queen of Hearts on his chest. 3 for 3. They ran. They ran back through the alleys, bursting through their back door at 3:41. In the basement, Carlos buried the gun under a loose floorboard. Miguel threw up in the sink. They scrubbed their hands, changed their clothes, and burned the old ones. At 4:15 a.m., they lay in their beds in the dark, listening to their own hearts, waiting for the sirens. They came at 6:47 a.m. police cars, ambulances, racing through the neighborhood. At 7:30, Rosa made them breakfast. The news on the radio reported a triple homicide in Kensington. 3 men found dead. Rosa crossed herself. Carlos and Miguel said nothing. Detective Raymond Walsh arrived at the first scene at 3:52 a.m. He saw the bodies. He saw the identical playing cards. By the third body, he knew this was a message. He worked the case all day, compiling a list of enemies. But something about the cards bothered him. The Queen of Hearts. That evening, he pulled the file on a closed assault case from 3 days prior, Sophia Luna. The 3 suspects, Robert Morrison, David Thompson, Vincent Russo. The same 3 men who were now dead. Walsh drove to the Luna house at 8:15 p.m. He spoke to Carlos and Miguel. They were calm. Their mother swore they were home asleep. He asked to search the house. Rosa refused without a warrant. Walsh didn't have probable cause. He sat in his car across the street and watched the house. He knew they did it. He knew it in his gut, but he had no evidence. He also knew something else. Would a jury in Philadelphia in 1991 convict 2 working men with no records for killing the 3 violent criminals who tried to rape their sister? He didn't think so. He thought a jury would thank them. Walsh made a decision. He filed his report, listed the case as gang-related and unsolved. He never mentioned the Luna brothers. In his 17 years on the force, he had learned that sometimes justice and the law were not the same thing. The story died. The case remains officially unsolved to this day. In the neighborhood, whispers spread. Most people thought the brothers were heroes. The Frankfort Avenue crew collapsed. For a brief moment, Kensington was slightly safer. Carlos and Miguel Luna continued their lives, but they were changed. Carlos had nightmares. Miguel started drinking. They never spoke of it again. Sophia graduated in 1993 and became a nurse at Children's Hospital. She never spoke of the assault. She never asked her brothers what they did. She suspected, but she couldn't bring herself to know for sure. Rosa Luna prayed every night for their souls. The family scattered over the years. Miguel married and had children. Carlos lived alone. Sophia dedicated her life to helping others. Detective Walsh retired in 2003 and died of cancer in 2011. Carlos Luna died of a heart attack in 2018 at age 56. Miguel Luna is 59 now, living in Northeast Philadelphia, dealing with the trauma. Sophia Luna is 57, still a nurse, still carrying the weight of that night, still unsure if she is grateful or horrified by what her brothers did for her. Now, 35 years later, we are left with the question that has no good answer. Were Carlos and Miguel Luna heroes or murderers? Under the law, they were premeditated murderers. They planned it, they stalked their victims, they executed them. But the law failed. Those 3 men walked free. They would have continued to hurt people. The Luna brothers stopped them. They were vigilantes. But are all vigilantes wrong? What happens when the system can't or won't protect you? The uncomfortable truth is that both things are true. They were murderers, and they were protectors. They broke the law, and they delivered a kind of justice the law couldn't. The question isn't whether it was legal. It wasn't. The question is whether it was right, and that depends on what you believe about justice, about the social contract, and what happens when the government fails to uphold its end. Think about it from every angle. If you were Sophia, would you want your brothers to do what they did? If you were Carlos, could you have let it go? If you were a potential future victim of those men, would you care how they were stopped? And look at the cost. Carlos and Miguel paid a human price. They lived with guilt, trauma, and nightmares for the rest of their lives. They saved their sister and destroyed their own peace in the process. The hard truth is that there are no good answers in a story like this. Only impossible choices and lasting consequences. The cycle continues because the problems that created the Luna brothers, poverty, addiction, a failing system, they haven't been solved. Nothing has changed, and so nothing has changed. If this story made you think about justice, revenge, and the price of protecting the people we love, leave a like to help more people find it. Share this video. Comment your thoughts. Were Carlos and Miguel Luna heroes or murderers? There is no correct answer, and that is exactly the conversation we need to have. Subscribe for more true stories that challenge what we think we know about right and wrong. Because these stories aren't just from the past. They are happening right now, in neighborhoods just like Kensington, where ordinary people are being forced to make the same impossible choices.